Some people actively go out looking for ghost encounters, and every once in a while they find one. When Kevin was a teenager, he and his friends had heard about a dangerous turn on the nearby highway that caused many accidents over the years. It was now haunted. The most well-known story was of a mother who took her own life after her son had crashed his car and died there. It was said around town that her ghost remained at the deadly turn to protect people from ending up like her deceased child. Kevin and his friends decided to put that theory to the test. At night, Kevin drove his friends out to the highway. When the group of boys arrived at the turn, they pulled over. They'd brought a bag of flour with them and proceeded to sprinkle the white powder on the road, the grass, and the car. The idea was to get footprints to prove that the ghost was indeed real. The boys hopped back in and began to take the car around the turn. Kevin accelerated faster and faster, and then, thump! The car came to an abrupt halt as if someone had slammed down on it with their own two hands. They immediately got out of the car and saw 2 woman-sized handprints in the white flour. 4 young women moved into an old New England apartment together. You know, the type with squeaky floorboards and a long, dark hallway. A month after they moved in, one of the roommates realized that her favorite stuffed teddy bear was missing. The others all said they hadn't touched it or seen it. Weeks went by and she almost forgot about her teddy when something strange happened. She opened the door to one of the closets they hardly ever used, and there on top of the shelf sat her furry friend. All of her roommates swore they had no idea how it happened. Now, whenever the teddy bear goes missing for a few days, she knows exactly where to find it. 2 young men in their 20s, Josh and Dan, went on a camping trip together in a desert in New Mexico. They didn't take much with them besides sleeping bags, food, and materials for a fire. After they cooked their dinner, they fell asleep as they gazed up into the starry night sky. The beauty and peace of the trip were short-lived, however. In the early dark hours of the morning, Josh was startled awake by what sounded like Dan's voice, but frantic. The voice said, "Come here. Look, quick." Sleepy and confused, Josh got up to see what his friend was talking about. He heard again, "Come here, quick. Look." It sounded unnatural, a perfect repetition. Josh took a few steps forward, and then someone grabbed him from behind. He turned around to see Dan with his finger in front of his mouth, warning Josh to stay quiet. They rolled up their sleeping bags and left. They still don't know who or what was trying to lure Josh into the desert. 3 little girls were having a sleepover one night when they decided to try to host a seance. One of the girls, Clara, recently lost her grandpa and wanted to see if she could commune with the spirit. The 3 girls gathered some candles and a few items that belonged to the late grandfather. His watch, his cigar case, and a photograph of him. The girls held hands and started the seance. Suddenly, the candles began to flicker, and the hands on the watch began to spin. Clara was sure it was her grandpa. Elated, she began to talk to him and ask him questions, when all of a sudden one of the candles flew, as if by some invisible force, and almost hit her head. "Grandpa would never do that," she said, shaking. She was right. It wasn't her grandpa, and whoever it was clearly did not like being disturbed. One night, a group of adults were having a dinner party. There were 6 of them, and they had all just taken their seats when they heard an unexpected knock at the door. The woman hosting the dinner party opened the door to see who it could possibly be, but no one was there. Somebody must have realized they had the wrong address, she explained to her guests. But when they all turned their attention back to the table, there was a 7th plate set. "Was that there before?" one of the men asked. I must have set an extra place by mistake," said the hostess. She took it back to the kitchen, but when she returned, Another plate was there, this time with a glass next to it. The other guests had been talking amongst themselves and hadn't seen anything strange, but when they realized what had happened, they were shocked and didn't know what to do. At this point, they figured the best strategy was to play along, so they filled the empty glass and plate so as to not upset their mysterious uninvited party guest. An unidentified body was found in a stream in Georgetown, Texas on the 31st of October, 1979. The nickname Orange Socks was derived from the fact that the body was found completely naked, save for a pair of orange socks on the victim's feet. Forensic inspection revealed that the unidentified body was strangled to death only a few hours before it was discovered. Further inspection of the victim's corpse revealed that Orange Socks was sexually assaulted multiple times. Her body was bruised, both from being strangled and assaulted, and having been thrown from the overpass. Her legs were unshaven, her nails long and painted, and she had a distinctive scar under her chin. Despite this, she remained unidentified. However, her murderer was soon found. Serial killer Henry Lee Lucas confessed to the murder, despite there being no physical evidence linking him to the crime. After interrogation, Lucas revealed that he had picked up Orange Socks in Oklahoma, where they had sex. Afterwards, as Lucas was driving, he demanded that they have sex again, at which point the victim refused. Lucas got upset, then proceeded to murder and rape her corpse. He even showed police officers how he dragged her body and where he had thrown her over the guardrail, which was consistent with where the body was found. But the mystery surrounding the murder was not really lifted. Lucas was notorious for freely admitting to murders he never actually committed, and evidence later came about indicating that he was probably working in Florida on the day of said murder. Sadly, meaning that the true murderer and victim remain, to this day, ambiguous. Marvin Brandlin and his wife Ethel had their bowls of candy ready and waiting. It was Halloween, and the children of the neighborhood were trick-or-treating that night. Later in the evening, Marvin and his wife heard a knock on the door and went to open it. The first thing they heard was, "Trick or treat, give me your money or I'll shoot." They looked up and saw someone in a homemade mask made out of a pillowcase with the eyes cut out. Marvin and Ethel laughed, thinking it was a Halloween prank being pulled on them by a friend or family member. That was until the person produced a gun and ordered them to lead him to the safe, a safe which few knew existed. Marvin and Ethel laughed uneasily. How did this person know about the safe if he wasn't a family member? Still convinced that this was an elaborate and unfunny prank, Marvin reached for the gun and tried to wrestle it out of the person's hand. The attacker, in the tussle that followed, shot Marvin Brandlin in the throat. Panicking, the shooter then took off his mask and made a dash towards the door. It was Halloween night, and Nima Louise Carter's exhausted parents finally laid the 18-month-old to sleep in their Oklahoma home. To their horror, she wasn't there the next morning. Creepily, the windows of the room that Nima was in were locked that night, meaning that whoever abducted her must have been hiding in the closet when her parents placed her in the crib. Almost 4 months later, some children were playing in an abandoned house in the same neighborhood as the Carter household. As they opened the door of the house's refrigerator, they were beyond shocked to find the remains of an 18-month-old baby who was identified as the missing Nima Louise Carter. Forensic inspection revealed that the child died of suffocation. Horrifically, the exact same situation had occurred the year prior. 3-year-old twin sisters were lured out of their homes by a young woman and abducted, being stuffed into the fridge inside another abandoned home in Lawton, Oklahoma. One of the sisters unfortunately met her fate. The other miraculously survived despite being locked in the fridge for over 2 days. The survivor was able to identify her abductor as Jackson Ribideau, a local teenage babysitter. But because of the girl's young age and lack of other evidence at the time, Jacqueline was never indicted, and as fate would have it, Nima Louise Carter's babysitter was none other than Jacqueline Robideau. Obviously, Jacqueline was a prime suspect in the kidnapping and murder of Nima Carter, but again, there was not enough evidence to press charges. Years later, she was finally arrested and formally indicted with the murder of the aforementioned twin sister and given a life sentence. She died in 2005 after being diagnosed with liver cancer in jail. It was the early hours of Halloween in Manhattan, New York, when Ronald Sisman and Elizabeth Platzman were burgled and murdered. The couple were severely beaten and injured before being shot in the head at close range. Ronald was rumored to be involved in shady drug deals, so from an outsider's perspective, the motive seemed clear. What makes this whole ordeal very creepy is the fact that this murder was foretold by a prison inmate a few weeks before it took place, and that man turned out to be none other than the notorious serial killer, David son of Sam Berkowitz, who was speaking to a prison informant. In 1977, David Berkowitz was convicted of shooting and murdering 6 people and injuring 7 others and was serving life sentences in jail. It was always widely speculated that Berkowitz had been part of a satanic cult and that he didn't commit all 6 murders he was serving sentences for. According to the prison informant, Berkowitz accurately described the crime scene, saying his cult was planning to break into a Manhattan home on Halloween night. No one really knows if the murders of Sisman and Platzman had anything to do with Berkowitz, but the murder case remains unsolved to this day. One night in Long Island just before Halloween of 2014, a decapitated body laid in the street 5 feet away from a severed head. To many passerby, the horrific sight appeared to be a Halloween prank, but the truth was far more disturbing. 35-year-old Derek Ward had used a kitchen knife to kill and decapitate his mother, Patricia, then carried the body and head out of their apartment. After leaving the body and head in the street, Ward jumped in front of a commuter train, killing himself. On Halloween in 1984, 8-year-old Brian Massey should have been enjoying a night of trick-or-treating with his sisters, Tiffany 11 and Tamara 10. Instead, he was subjected to a real-life horror film when his new stepfather, 26-year-old David Andrews, stabbed his mother to death before chasing his sisters down the hall and murdering them as well. Andrews then came into Massey's room, covered in blood, and kidnapped the boy. 2 days later, police found Massey alive after apprehending Andrews, who had tried and failed to kill himself. Disturbingly, Andrews struck a plea deal in exchange for a reduction of charges. He is eligible to be paroled next month. The now 41-year-old Massey vehemently opposes. Thank you guys for watching and listening to the very end. Please make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And if you would like your story featured on an upcoming video, send it to my email in the description box below. And until we meet again, stay safe, stay out there, and stay sinful.
G'day mates, it's B-Buster here, and I would like to give Green Chef a big shout out for sponsoring this episode. So Green Chef is a CCOF certified meal kit company. They make eating well easy with plans to fit every lifestyle. Whether you're keto, paleo, vegan, vegetarian, gluten-free, or just looking to eat a more balanced meal, Green Chef offers a range of recipes to suit your preferences. Also, Green Chef is now actually owned by HelloFresh, and with a wider array of meal plans to choose from, there's something for everyone. I really like switching between the brands, and now you guys can enjoy both brands at a discount with me. Green Chef makes cooking really easy, so you can spend less time stressing and more time enjoying delicious home-cooked meals. Green Chef saves you time by cutting down on weekly meal planning, prepping, and grocery shopping. It's also the most sustainable meal kit and offsets 100% of your carbon footprint. With Green Chef, you're reducing your food waste by at least 25% versus grocery shopping, according to a HelloFresh Global Food Waste study. They truly have an enormous menu, and I really love the way that they organize their selections into different dietary and lifestyle choices. It's super easy to look through the selections and find something that I'm looking for quickly, like their French onion pork chops that I ordered. The creamy sauce on the pork chops was amazing, and the dish was just what I needed after a cold hike that I'd come back from with my buddies. So, go to greenchef.com/scared130 and use code SCARED130 to get $130 off plus free shipping. That's greenchef.com/scared130 and use the code SCARED130 to get $130 off plus free shipping. Join the #1 meal kit for eating well today. Green Chef. I'm a real estate agent who works and lives in a small town in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountain. I work alongside my husband at his family-owned agency that has been here since the 70s. We rarely sell homes or represent buyers for homes that are more than like an hour outside of our area, but occasionally when I have an appointment with a client close to the highway that takes me one up the mountain, I take the opportunity to drive another 30 minutes towards my favorite scenic mountain overlook. It was a rainy day in May that I needed to assess the progress of a house under construction. This house was only 30 minutes away from this overlook. I decided after assessing that the house had little to no progress since the last time that I drove past it, so I would head towards the overlook. There was nothing unusual about this rainy day until I turned left onto the highway leading me to the overlook. Several yards before coming to a stop sign, I noticed a blackbird in the middle of the road that appeared sort of indifferent towards me driving straight for it. The bird's response time was delayed for a clean getaway. I heard its body fly right into the grille of my Ford, crunching its fragile bones, and looking in the rearview mirror with a distraught face, I saw that I cleaned its head right off. Now, I'm not a crazily superstitious person, but I do believe in signs, whether positive or negative, that the world provides before events unfold. I told myself, this cannot be good, and after maybe driving 10 or so minutes up the mountain, the light rain turned into a pour, making the road slick, the fog thick, and extremely difficult to drive. At this point, I could feel something telling me to just turn back. I felt as though something was off, and justified that it was a feeling of guilt for killing that innocent black bird back there. I kept driving. 5 minutes passed, and I wasn't far away from the overlook. For the last 25 minutes I'd been driving, nobody was behind me until now. A small red Tacoma truck that had a porta-john in its bed was tailing my car. I figured that I would lose the truck since it would probably continue to the highway as I would turn left towards the overlook. But to my unfortunate surprise, it followed me and proceeded to inch even closer to my vehicle. I was slightly panicking as the rain poured even harder and the fog made it that much more difficult to see the road in front of me. 2 minutes away from the overlook, I noticed a white truck with its lights turned on and pulled off the side of the road. The car looked as though it was waiting for someone, but what a peculiar place to wait since, there's really nothing there. The red truck is still on my tail, and just as I was sure that he would run off the mountain, I found the overlook to my left, swerved into its parking lot, and finally let out a huge sigh of relief. But it was very short-lived. I looked to my left a few yards away. The small red Tacoma truck was parked, as well as at the overlook parking lot. For a few minutes, I sat in my car thinking to myself, maybe he's just taking a lunch break, or perhaps he just couldn't see anything past the fog and doesn't want to chance driving in these conditions. A few more minutes passed, and the individual driving the red truck opened his door to get outside, and in his arms, he was holding a gun. He was a 5'8", grimy man with black hair, around his mid-40s with a toothpick in his mouth, overalls with a strap hanging off, and a shotgun that would make the bravest of men cower. He was making strides towards my car, but I didn't want to wait for him to reach his destination. I trembled with immense fear and immediately started my car, and I headed in the direction that I'd come from. The grimy man didn't follow me in a small red truck, but the white truck parked off the side of the road from earlier was on my tail again and driving even more recklessly than the man with the shotgun. The rain was finally starting to lighten up a bit, but the fog lingered way longer than I wished it did. He drove on my tail for 10 minutes until I finally lost him in the fog and quickly turned right back onto the road. I was relieved that it didn't turn into an impasse on the mountain because, to be honest, who knows what would have happened if it had been like that. I lived in a 100 to 150-year-old house, according to the landlord anyway. For 6 months-ish, while my family was renovating our home, it was a very old house with a creepy basement and a hidden second staircase behind the kitchen. There were 4 bedrooms, 2 vacant, the one that I slept in and the one my parents slept in. The one my parents slept in had a walk-in closet with a window in it where you could look through and see the top of the stairs. I always thought that it was strange, and it'll be an important detail later, so keep it in mind. So, we moved in when I was around 15, or I had just turned 15, that is. The memories are a little bit foggy, but I'll try my best to remember everything. So, the first instance of activity that I can remember was the night that I moved in, and it was pretty passive, as I would call it anyway. I remember sitting up alone in my room after unpacking a couple of boxes, and I was listening to a CD on this old stereo that my parents had bought. My parents were downstairs watching TV, I think, and I remember everything just being, pretty fine. It was late at night and it was dark, the only light on upstairs being my room. The hall was pitch black, and I should add that I had never been scared of the dark except for when I was a young kid. But I remember pausing my music because I could have swore that I heard footsteps, and I thought my dad was coming up the stairs to tell me to turn it down. He did that a lot. But I still heard him talking to my mum downstairs. It felt, though, like someone was standing in the doorway, and I remember feeling really unsettled. The feeling didn't leave me too, and I sat there for a solid 5 minutes, putting my music back on to try and ease my mind, but it still felt distinctly like someone was standing there, staring at me in the doorway. I couldn't see anyone, obviously, but I remember getting so spooked out that I hurried downstairs and I joined my parents in the living room. I said that I felt creeped out, and my mum said that it was probably just being in a new place and I'd settle down and get used to it eventually. Bearing in mind that this was my first ever experience of the paranormal, and I had never felt like this before. I was convinced that somebody was upstairs though, but my parents, they just brushed it off. Now, this sort of thing persisted for a few days, but only when I was somewhere alone. My mum refuses to talk about the house, so I've never found out if either of my parents had the same experiences, but given her defensiveness on it, I presume that she must have. Less passive things, though, started happening after this. At first, I dismissed it. Things like the pool balls on the table being moved when I returned to the games room, even when I knew that I put them there in their little triangle formation for the game. But when I'd come back, they'd be scattered across the table like someone broke them and started the game without me. Small things would go missing too and reappear somewhere else, or move very slightly, but just sort of nuisance things like that. Things one could disregard as just forgetting something. This persisted for a while, and I didn't tell my parents about it because I didn't think anything of it. I remember though when things got more intense. I'd start to get chills right before something would happen, in fact. The room would get freezing cold for no explainable reason. The house did have many drafts, but it wasn't enough to make the room from like lukewarm to freezing cold in a few seconds like that. That was something weird. And then something would always happen, like an object would fall, or I'd hear a noise and the room would go back to being warm again, like nothing had changed. The first time that I felt truly scared was when I woke up in the bed in the middle of the night and I felt like something was staring at me. I always slept with my door shut, and it felt like a stranger was standing in my room, over me, watching me sleep. I had a shelf of books and various ornaments above my bed. My bed was against the wall, and I remember 3 of them falling on my legs and feet, one right after the other, and then everything just went completely quiet again. Nothing else happened that night, and I fell back asleep, which was difficult, but I would also hear tapping on my door at various points in the night, and I was awake for a couple of those occasions too. One night I couldn't sleep, and I heard 3 taps on my door. Admittedly, they were very quiet, like somebody had tapped a single fingernail against the door 3 times. But there was this one night where this happened multiple times, but the tapping would always come in 3s. Then it would be silent for about half an hour, and then I would hear it again. In those beginning 3 weeks, looking back on it, the activity was like your standard haunting, I guess. Just nuisance and creepy things. But it was about a month into living there that things got super intense for me, and quite honestly, really scary. It was like the intensity scale went from 0 to 100 within a few days. Well, at least that's what it felt like. It was such a drastic change from the odd disturbance to actual violent events that I couldn't explain it. One evening, I was in the house alone, only for about an hour. I was rarely ever in the house alone, to be honest. There was always such a foul feeling about it that I avoided it, and I felt unsafe ever being there by myself at this point. My family had to be there, or else I would just go out and wait out by the back door until they got home from work in my school uniform. I felt entirely on edge the entire time. I couldn't sit still, I couldn't focus on homework or the TV, music, nothing. I just kept feeling that same feeling, like someone was watching me, but it felt worse somehow because I was alone, I guess. I couldn't run to anyone to feel better. It was just me and whatever this was. I remember I was trying to focus on some movie or on the TV, and the room all of a sudden went cold again, and I was instantly like, oh no, what do I do? By now, I had figured out that what I was dealing with was some sort of a spirit, and I was very familiar with the concept of ghosts and hauntings, but I didn't believe any of it until I moved into this place. I remember the movie was just ending and the screen went dark on the credits screen, and I could see my own reflection in the TV. And I saw something very distinct rush behind me, past me, and presumably through the door into the kitchen. You had to walk through the living room to get to this kitchen, and it was like a tall black smoky figure, but it had no distinguishing shape. What I mean is that it had like no humanoid figure. It was almost like just a bundle of half-transparent black smoke that just sort of shot past in half a second. Seriously, like one blink and I would have missed it. Now, I'm not going to say that I acted tough in this moment or that I was brave or anything. I literally just burst into tears because I was terrified. And somehow seeing it made all my fears a reality that I couldn't pass off as an excuse anymore. My parents obviously didn't believe a word that I told them, so I just stopped telling them anything, and they didn't help, making me think that I was delusional and perhaps even crazy. I saw it again too, a total of 4 separate occasions. The second being when I was in a walk-in closet in my parents' bedroom looking for something. I can't remember what it was, but I remember peeking out of the weird window that I told you about earlier and seeing a black shadow for a few seconds on the stairs, and it just sort of faded away. The third occasion was a tall black mist standing still in the corner of my room. I woke up and I felt paralyzed. That was my first experience ever of sleep paralysis too, and I remember seeing it in my peripheral vision, standing in the corner of my room until I regained, well, consciousness, I guess you could call it, in my body, and when I could move, I turned to face it, and It had just disappeared. This one you might be able to discount as a hallucination. I'm aware of that because I know people experience sleep paralysis and weird things like this, so take that one with a grain of salt, I guess. But the fourth and final time, I saw it fully, and it was in the kitchen. I was writing out a French exam, I'm pretty sure, or something to do with French class, and I turned and saw it rush through the kitchen door into the living room. I don't know why I saw it. I don't know if it was showing itself to me or something, because I've never seen another spirit since, and I've lived in multiple homes, perhaps even haunted ones. The worst experience, however, was yet to come. There's two that sort of tie hand in hand with the worst experiences in this house, which convinced me that this thing did not have good intentions. You see, I felt touches and what felt like light shoves sometimes, especially when I was on the stairs. I'd feel like a cold, icy breeze against my shoulder, like something was running their hand really quickly across my skin. The worst day for me, though, was when I was upstairs alone. You see, I went into the third bedroom. It was used as a storage room, and that room was always cold, freezing even. Even if you stuck a heater in there, it would just never really seem to warm up. But I remember that I went into the room and started rifling through boxes, and I was looking for something. I remember sitting back because I could just smell something rotten. Not like that sickly, moldy, sweet smell that is like rotten food or fruit. If you've ever smelt a dog food box that's sort of exploded and left to go moldy, then you'll know what the type of smell that I'm talking about is. It was absolutely putrid, and it honestly just came out of nowhere. And I just remember a box at the end of the room shaking, gently, sort of back and forth. I looked at it, and it was just a box of books. There wasn't anything significant, just a random storage box. Trying not to be sick at the same time as watching this, mind you, the smell was making me gag every second, and I was just glued to my spot on the floor watching this box move on its own. And the feeling in that room was so heavy all of a sudden. It was like the air was physically pressing down on my skin and my chest, and it was really hard to breathe all of a sudden. I couldn't think. All I could feel was anger and fear. I don't even know where the anger came from, to be honest. Maybe being angry at this thing for making me feel threatened in my own home? I'm not sure, but that's how I felt at the time, and I remember it. I also remember when the box slid a few centimeters. It didn't slide by much, but after it slid, it was still, and the smell just, all of a sudden, faded away. But that entire day, I felt like something was almost sitting on my shoulders. My entire body felt so heavy, and I felt really tired and grouchy, and I was lashing out at everyone around me in this blind anger that I couldn't explain. I went to bed early because I felt so tired that day, and I remember waking up the next morning, and I had 3 lovely bright red scratches across the top of my arm, and I knew that I didn't do them. One of the reasons, too, is because I'm a very bad nail biter. I haven't really got any nails to speak of, and definitely did not back then. The entire remainder of the time that I stayed there, though, and for quite some time after, I just couldn't shake this feeling, this heavy feeling that I had. It always felt like I had a chain strapped to my ankle. Every breath, every step felt heavy. I was always so tired and sort of depressed all the time. Ever since that day in the room with the box, it's like, I don't know, everything just changed for me. Everything was flipped upside down, and my happiness just tanked. And even 6 years later, things are just not the same. So, I guess my question for you guys is, does anyone have any idea as to what all this was? And if you do, is there anything that I can do to change this? To go back to a time before any of this happened? So this morning I was napping on my couch when I heard my dog start barking and growling at my patio door. I got up and peeked around the curtain to see what got them riled up like this. And when I did, I saw 3 kids in my driveway. One older boy looked to be around maybe 13 or 14, a younger boy maybe around 10, and a younger girl looked to be around maybe 7 years old. They were all blonde and pale. I was obviously creeped out by this, but I ignored it, and I went back to lay down hoping that they would just go away. I mean, they're just kids after all. But a few minutes later, I heard a noise at my front door, so I peeked around the corner and saw the little girl looking in my window, and her eyes were completely black. Like, there was no color in them whatsoever. Even where the whites should be, they were completely dark. Obviously, I didn't answer the door, and I just sort of hid in my living room until eventually they seemed to leave. Now, I don't want to say that I'm entirely sure that this absolutely happened, because I do tend to have very vivid dreams when I take my morning nap. But this time, it felt really real, and I was walking around, I'm sure of it. I truly hope that it was just some weird dream or something, but anyway, I just wanted to share this and get your thoughts. I was a 16-year-old girl and an avid runner. I ran anywhere from 4 to 10 miles a day. I had a few parks that I rotated through and decided one day after school and before work to run at this pretty secluded park next to the river. It was a really hot day and I knew this park had a lot of shade, so I thought that that would be really good. Now, I usually carried a knife or pepper spray with me, but forgot it at home this time and didn't really have time to go back home before work. Coming in, I noticed a few mums with their kids at the playground, and what I believed to be one of the children's grandpas watching their kids play. I love kids, so I always enjoy seeing them. Cut to me running my laps, though, and it was getting closer to dinner time, and the families all started to slowly leave. This park was 2 laps per mile, so I was on the second half of mile 3 when I noticed all of the mums and the kids were just all of a sudden gone. I was a little bit uncomfortable since I believed that I was all alone in this park at this point. I guess something about when the mums were there just comforted me. But now I was alone, or so I thought at least. I'm nearly finished with mile 3 when, out of the corner of my eye, I see a grandpa starting to walk the track coming my way. I'm confused since I believe that he was with the kids earlier, but now all of a sudden the kids were gone. I didn't see another car in the lot besides mine as well. And to make things even more creepy, he was sucking on a lollipop. It was random, but somehow added to the creep factor, I guess, for me at least. My body was telling me to flee, but I'm a stubborn teenager who was determined to run 4 miles that day. I figured that I would just run past him and be able to move on with my run. I mean, it's not like he would outrun me, right? Anyway, I'm about 3 steps from him and doing all I can to pretend that I don't see him, acting like I'm super focused and can't be bothered. Just as I thought that I had made it past him successfully, he somehow grabs the wire of my headphones, no earpods since this was back in 2010, and pulls them out of my ears. I turn around at him absolutely livid, but as a woman, I know that I have to play nice to try and lessen my chance of being murdered or something. So I look at him, smile and say, "Are you okay?" He takes a long pause, still sucking on that lollipop, then pulls it out and shows me this really creepy grin that sends shivers down my spine. He looks me up and down and says, "Like to play alone, huh?" while grabbing a piece of my blonde hair that was in a ponytail. I smacked his hand off my hair and sprinted as fast as I think that I ever have back to my car at this point. I had a 1994 Saturn that could only be unlocked manually with a key, so like any horror movie, it takes me a ridiculous amount of attempts to get this key in the hole. All the while, I can hear him walking towards me, slow and steady. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was most likely only a few seconds, I unlocked my car and jumped in. I locked the door, and soon after the old man was almost to my car. I start the engine and start to back out of my parking spot. I see the man try to get behind my car, but luckily I was quick enough, so he wasn't able to. I booked it out of the parking lot, and I didn't look back. Now, obviously, I don't know what his plans were. I don't know why he was watching those children play, and I don't know how the heck he kept a lollipop in his mouth so long without it melting away like that. I'm just really glad that I didn't stick around to find out what his plans were. Fast forward to now, though, and I'm 28 years old and have still never returned to that park, even though it's the closest park to my house. Hopefully, that man is long gone, but I, for one, am not going to go and look and see. My dad lives near a woodland track that's perfect for dog walking, and during COVID, he got a dog which I've not really had much interaction with due to the nearly 2 years of restrictions. This dog can become anxious though and worried when she can't find someone that she recognizes. So we decided that the best way to get her comfortable with me would be to take her for a walk along the track. I would let her off the lead, and if she wandered too far, call her name to get her back. It was towards the end of this walk that stuff got really creepy very quickly though. You see, it starts getting dark and we're nearing the end of the track and the beginning of the main road back home. I call the dog back to put her lead on, all is fine, until she's back by my side, because just as I'm leaning down to put her lead back on, I hear a noise in the woods. My dad's dog hears it too and nearly sprints after it. I manage to get her lead on in time though and look towards the noise. Then I hear it again. A voice. A voice calling my dog's name just as I have been all walk. And I don't just mean saying the same name. I mean trying its hardest to copy my voice. I feel like I'm completely frozen in place. I didn't want to turn my head from the woods in case whoever this was came running out at me. I was praying that I was just hearing things, but then, just like the time before, but this time from a spot closer to us, the voice called out for my dog again. It was at this point that I grabbed the dog and I ran. I didn't hear the voice again, and eventually I got out of this place and I went back home. And while I realized that this was a very brief encounter, it's still one of the most terrifying situations that I've ever found myself in. So I was out one morning, late for school, and decided, hey, I'm already late, what will it hurt to get something to eat? So I stop by a McDonald's and I go in. It's like 7 in the morning and there's nobody in there but this guy and his kid. The man offers to buy me breakfast, as it's pouring rain and you look like you could talk to someone. I figure, sure, free meal, why not? So he orders me food and I sit down at the table with him and his kid. I'm not sure if they were a girl or a boy to be honest, but they were short and had this big hoodie on, messy hair, the works. This guy, on the other hand, was a solid 6'5", well-dressed and super sociable. He sat down and started talking about God and his church and all this other stuff. But the whole time his kid was picking their breakfast burrito apart and staring at me. They had marker all over their fingers like they dipped their hands into ink or something. They looked like the only thing keeping them awake was, I don't know, terror. The guy excused himself to the bathroom at one point, and his kid slid a piece of paper over to me with what looked like crudely scribbled on with horns labeled neon and effing garbage. That definitely freaked me out, and I left after that. I have no clue how old this kid was, but I'd say maybe 12. It wasn't horrifying, but the combo of his hobo demon child glaring at me as they ripped up napkins and scribbled creepy drawings and ate their burrito in a sort of demented manner, contrasted by the dad being overly polite and excessively talking about God and bringing people to the light and salvation and stuff like that. made me super uncomfortable and scared the daylights out of me. I don't know. I think that there was something more going on. In any case, these days, I use the drive-thru only now. So before I begin this, I would like to say first that I've always believed in the paranormal, even though this was the first time that I'd ever witnessed something supernatural like this. Also, English isn't my first language, so I apologize for anything that sounds a bit weird. So, I, an 18-year-old male, live in northwestern France, Normandy, and it's not a place with endless forests. In fact, it's pretty flat and boring for the most part. Since I was a kid, I would stay there for 2 weeks during the spring holidays at my grandparents' house in the Jura region in eastern France. The Jura region is a really hilly place with a lot of forests and amazing wildlife, so it's pretty much the opposite of where I'm from. During my time here, I usually go deep into the woods to pick mushrooms and berries, and I never really saw anything weird. The animals that you see there are like deer, foxes, badgers, wild boars, squirrels, rabbits, and very recently, even some wolves have been back in this area of France. Now, if I remember correctly, it was the 2nd of May 2022, and as I said, I was in the forest near the village of Guyron to pick berries. I was alone there. There was nobody around, but it was not something like strange or anything because it's a very sparsely populated part of France. But the thing that did feel strange was the fact that I didn't see any animals. No deer, no wild boars, no foxes. In fact, it was eerily silent. I'm not going to lie, I was starting to get a little bit uncomfortable because the silence was making me a little bit scared, but I decided to keep picking berries because my mum wanted to make some pies and I love her pies. As I was walking in the woods, I could see a clearing and I was thinking about taking a break in this place because I've been walking for like almost an hour at this point. That was until I saw a very big, dark mass that was bipedal and it was standing in the clearing. I stopped walking and I was staring at this thing behind the trees for like 20 seconds before I just turned tail and I ran back to the village. Now, to give a bit of a description, it was very tall and hairy, probably maybe 7 foot. Perhaps the best way that I can describe it too is that it looked like a bipedal wolf or like a half dog, sort of half human. And I don't know if this thing saw me, but ever since then, I've never put a foot back in that forest again. When I got back to my grandparents' house, I gave my mum the berries that I'd picked and I stayed in my room for the rest of the day. I conducted a lot of research about the wildlife in this region to see if what I saw was some kind of a rare animal or something, but no. What I saw, as far as I can tell, was not an animal at all. While conducting the research, I did stumble across a story from the 16th century, though. It's the story of a werewolf that apparently was destroying children in the village of Jura. It was in a place called Amange, and even though Amange is pretty far from Guyron, it's still in the Jura area, so there is a possible connection, I guess. In any case, I was really freaked out by this discovery, but I wanted to know more about werewolves and stories like that in this part of France, so I watched a 2-hour-long video about 2 women who were talking about what they saw in the Jura. When I looked at the drawing that one of the women in the video did, my heart stopped because, I'm telling you, it looked exactly like what I saw that day. Now, I know that werewolves are a part of the Jura folklore. There's even a celebration that takes place the last weekend of June to celebrate the story of the werewolf of Amange. But since this experience, I just haven't been able to sleep well at my grandparents' house because, I don't know, I always feel like I'm just being watched or something. The view from my window is nothing but a big forest, so it's really not reassuring. But I'm back in Normandy since May of 9th, but I'm thinking about it every day, and Now, I want to go back. I didn't tell anyone about this sighting yet because I don't want to sound crazy and I don't have any pictures to prove that I'm not lying, but I don't know. Maybe I could get something. What do you guys think? Am I crazy?